Robert David Steele comes highly recommended by Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer, who exposed the fact they were ordered to stand down twice when they could have killed Osama bin Laden and other leaders of al-Qaeda. That, of course, is famously discussed in congressional hearings with Abel Danger and Stratus Ivy. He was on with us last week to talk about the fact that the vast majority, not just 65 or 85, but over 90% of the rebels are connected to al-Qaeda type groups. So he said, hey, you ought to get Robert David Steele on. And so it's exciting to get him on. Robert David Steele is a former Marine, CIA case officer, U.S. spy, hacker, CEO of Open Source Solutions Network, Inc., and 2012 candidate for the Reform Party presidential nomination. He's currently CEO of Earth Intelligence Network, an accredited educational nonprofit. Robert is known for his advocacy of open source intelligence, teaching 7,500 mid-career officers from around 66 governments, and is today the foremost proponent of applied collective intelligence, which integrates holistic analytics, true cost economics, and open source everything. The latter, an engineering and information management approach that is affordable, and then it goes on to talk about being scalable. His most recent book is the Open Source Everything Manifesto, Transparency, Truth, and Trust. And we appreciate him joining us by beta, iota.net or bigbatusa.org, or two of his sites. And I notice he talks about how we have to get trust back. The New York Times is reporting that this is a global crisis of the elites, what's happening in Catalonia and Scotland and Texas. And Newt Gingrich is in the news today in National Review saying both Republicans and Democrats have lost the people's trust. 7% approval rating for Congress and Gallup. I mean, this is really an amazing time to be alive. There's a lot of waking up happening, but also a lot of tyranny. So I want to get into Benghazi. I want to get into what's happening with ISIS. I want to get into open source. I want to get into his new book, a lot. Cover the Waterfront with Robert David Steele. Robert, thanks for coming on with us.
Yeah, Alex, it's an honor, really. I'm very glad to be here.
It's great to be here. I mean, to have you. There's so much to discuss. I just threw out a whole bunch of stuff. What do you want to hit first?
You follow the program you've got. Benghazi's good. I've got 6 reasons why Benghazi was a cluster, a perfect storm.
Give us your take on Benghazi.
Well, first off, CIA did a Coast Kathy. One of the problems with CIA, where I was a clandestine case officer and I served in 3 overseas tours, including chasing terrorists and planning for regime change, is CIA is a bureaucracy. It doesn't actually do threat assessments. It's not actually in touch with ground truth. It tends to take most of its threat intelligence from local liaison, from its counterpart services. It doesn't have the clandestine human penetrations of rebel groups and others that it's supposed to have. So bottom line is, I think CIA got blindsided. They were doing their little arms transfer stuff, and they did not realize just how vulnerable a position they had put themselves in. Number 2, the Department of State is not responsible for defending CIA facilities that are not part of an established diplomatic installation. And the same is true for DOD. So CIA was out on its own, operating an annex that was not part of the lineup according to DOD or state, and they failed to defend themselves. Number 3, there was no Marine Expeditionary Unit offshore. Now, normally we have a Marine Expeditionary Unit offshore in the Med, but the Joint Chiefs of Staff, for reasons that are beyond me, decided that they didn't need one that particular month. Number 4, I think Panetta lost his nerve. I do believe that General Ham and everybody else said, hey, we've got to do something. We had 7 hours within which we could have done something. And one of the first things that I and other officers did when that email came into state was we posted a graphic of all of the available units that were within 1 to 2 hours away. And that graphic, if you look up graphic Benghazi fiasco master post, you'll get right to it. And that shows everything that was available. And then you have, besides Panetta losing his nerve, you basically have the president, the White House, dithering for 7 hours. There is no question but that the White House knew what to do. And I think it all comes down, for me, it comes down to Panetta losing his nerve.
Well, we look at Benghazi, and it's just another example of who this country's supposedly working for, because from what I've read and what's been open source, as you call it, this was really the security force there in Benghazi, the group that the West had been, conduiting arms through. And then for some reason, they decided to come down and attack the facility. I mean, I think that dovetails and segues off into the rest of ISIS or ISIL or Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and where all that's going. It was an exchange 2 days ago with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs in the Senate Armed Service Committee, Dempsey, with Senator Graham, and Graham was going, now, none of our allies ever work with ISIL, changing the names again, and then Dempsey goes, well, yeah, they're arming them. I mean, it seems like from what I've seen, the military knows that this is going on from the grassroots right up to the top, and I just don't see how they can get away with this. I mean, it's just so immoral to overthrow Assad and put something in 10 times worse, in my view. Do you agree with that, or what can you add to that?
Alex, I agree with you completely. And as you say, there's so much we could talk about, but let's unpack this a little bit. First off, let me give really high credit to the defense attachés on the ground. One of the great shining spots in defense intelligence is the Defense Attaché Corps, and the things these guys do and the risks they take to go out on the street in completely open capabilities. I really respect these guys. And yes, DOD gets stuff that CIA does not get, because CIA has its head up the rear end of foreign liaison. It literally does not have clandestine human penetrations of all of these groups. Now, number two, the American government generally, in the intelligence community particularly, are naive. They literally have allowed the Saudis to fund radical Islam. They've allowed the Zionists to basically take everything they want from us at American taxpayer expense. And we don't actually do a balance sheet of what's going on with the allies. My personal feeling is that we have absolutely no business putting troops into the Middle East. We have absolutely no business arming the Arab dictators, and we have no business paying 20% of the Israeli budget, which is being used to eradicate Palestine. But what this boils down to is a failure of American intelligence and a failure of American integrity. And let me stop there and give it back to you for a follow-up.
Oh, I just don't understand the policy. I mean, I could see a policy of balkanization, and I'm not an anti-Israel guy myself, but when Netanyahu came out a few months ago and was in the Jerusalem Post saying, ISIS might be good because it'll destabilize everything. That's just so Machiavellian to openly say we want failed states from Libya to Syria and even try to, destabilize Egypt. It sounds like set the world on fire and watch it burn.
Well, what you really have here is, I think Obama is a prisoner of state. The neoconservative game plan, which is also the Zionist game plan, and I certainly distinguish between the loyal American Jews and the loyal Jews in Israel and the nation of Israel, and then the Zionist management of Israel. It's only the last that I have a real problem with. But the neocons, when they took us to war on the basis of 935 now documented lies, they had a plan to destabilize the entire region. General Wes Clark went on video. His video is still up there talking about a foreign policy coup. What's happening now in Washington with ISIS is a second foreign policy coup, and it's 935 lies light.
I just don't see how they're going to get away with it, because most people are figuring out we're going to fund the rebels to take out the rebels, when the majority, any way you slice it, are the radicals. And then they just last week blew up the non-radicals all at some meeting. Shades of Darth Vader showing up, in episode 3 to kill the, the opposition leaders. I mean, it just really reeks. I mean, what is the policy from the best you know from your sources?
I don't see a policy. What I see is a spending plan. From where I sit, and this goes back to Vietnam and to Iraq and to the general perception within the neoconservative circles, the banking circles, the military industrial circles. And if you haven't had Chuck Spinney and Winslow Wheeler on, I certainly recommend them. What the money people are trying to do is send the military back into the Middle East to use it up, burn it out, have more veteran suicides, have more casualties. And they are completely oblivious to the fact that that's exactly what the Saudi Arabians and the Jordanians and the Qataris and the United Arab Republic and the Israelis, as you just pointed out, that's what they want us to do. They want America to put troops back on the ground so everybody will be angry at the Americans. And this will take some pressure off of the dictators in the Middle East who are essentially doing to their public what the Wall Street 1% has done to the American public. You know, I like to paraphrase Abe Lincoln, and one of the reasons that Scotland and Catalan and Quebec and all these other secessionist movements are active now, as a guy named Neil did so beautifully in the New York Times today, is you cannot screw 90% of the people 90% of the time, and that's what's happened these last 20 years. So I absolutely oppose any further American airstrikes, any further American destabilization of Syria, any further American troops into the Middle East. In fact, I think we should close down the 44 bases that we have surrounding Iran. We need to come back home where 30 to 40 towns in California and 30 to 40 towns in Texas have run out of water and Ebola. And there are other things we can talk about. But the bottom line is there is no policy.
Wow. We're going to come right back with our guest. There's several websites, but bigbatusa.org, Robert David Steele. We're going to talk about his view of intelligence gathering, which can be used for business or anything, from my perspective, and why the CIA doesn't have, I guess, what they call HUMAT, except domestically. Alex Jones here, back live. Robert David Steele is our guest. He's a Marine and, of course, a former CIA case officer, spy, hacker, CEO of Open Source Solutions Network. I want to talk about his book and what he means by open source everything. That's a book I want to read. But in the short segment, specifically because, you know, Israel does, at least in the U.S., become a sacred cow. It's also a sacred cow to bash Israel. It just becomes a bunch of tribal vitriol on both sides. I don't like the Israel lobby manipulating internal politics in this country, and I don't like other lobbies doing it either. So I don't like Israel, or at least people that run Israel, trying to couch any disagreements with what they say as being anti-Israel, even by Jews that live in Israel. It just becomes asinine. It's like saying you're racist if you don't agree with Obama on something, or if you don't like Obamacare, that, by the way, the Republicans just joined the Democrats in funding it. Boehner with Pelosi, but that's another issue we'll cover at another point. So I'm annoyed by both sides of this thing. Because then I just see vicious vitriol out of the anti-Israel crowd that uses their hatred of Israel as just an excuse to act however they want. But then I see out of what I guess you call the militarized state of the, you know, in Israel as kind of a military-industrial complex that Eisenhower talked about, using that as a way to control Israel and then skim the money off the top from all the U.S. aid. I mean, is that what you're basically getting at?
I totally agree with you. And let me come back to Morton Halperin's book, Bureaucratic Politics and Foreign Policy. That book tells you that rule number one in Washington is lie to the president if you can get away with it. And I will tell you that based on my looking at what John Kerry and Chuck Hagel are getting from their intelligence people and what Obama's getting, Obama has nobody today in Washington that he can trust to tell him the truth. And that's what I'm about. I'm about putting the truth on the table. The truth at any cost lowers all other costs. And right now, Obama is deaf, dumb, and blind.
Well, undoubtedly, you can see the policies by Western governments are completely run by special interest. And it's like the special interests are driving us off a cliff. They're not going to be able to spend all that money if we have nuclear war with Russia. They're not going to be able to spend all that if we, I mean, it's just so immoral. And I'm not romanticizing the elites of old like Eisenhower and Kennedy and people, but it just seems like there's a decadence to it, and weird warmongering women at the State Department. I mean, it's really obscene.
It is obscene, but I have good news for you. And it actually comes from the Rothschilds. I've been working with some people in Europe, and we're looking very much at how the economy is changing and what the messages are that are coming out from the elites. And I want to give Kissinger and Fareed Zakaria high marks, which I don't normally do, because they've broken ranks with the insiders that are pushing this war on ISIS. And if people go to Phi Beta Iota, the public intelligence blog, and just search for ISIS, they'll get some very compelling, truthful surveys of what's actually going on. But here is what happened in London. They had a conference on inclusive capitalism. This was sponsored by the City of London and by the Rothschilds, Lady Rothschild. This is nothing less than a primal scream. This is nothing less than the people who are managing $30 trillion saying, oh my God, the pitchforks are coming. So I'll tell you, Alex, you're absolutely right when you say this is a wonderful time to be alive. Because I think what is happening now is that the financial people are realizing that the two-party tyranny that they've been so happy to sponsor for so long has failed them. And they have to find a third path. And I think you and I are part of that third path.
What is your view? Obviously, when nobody lionizes Russia, it's got its share of corruption and, you know, kind of thuggish bureaucracy. But what do you think about Ukraine and where all this is going? Because it seems pretty dangerous to me.
Well, let me say, first off, I've been high on Putin for a long time. I think Putin is a professional, a realist, a serious guy, and he has put up with a lot of misbehavior by the United States as well as elements of Europe. On the Ukraine, Putin shares some of the blame because he allowed a corrupt communist government to go for too long, but now we have a corrupt fascist government. The Ukraine is a really ugly mess. The United States has no business being in there. NATO has no business saying that well, first off, NATO has been violating its promise to Russia that we would not embrace the Eastern European countries and add them to NATO. So we have a whole long line of broken promises with respect to Eastern Europe as a buffer zone.
Well, it's a broken treaty, isn't it?
Go ahead.
I mean, it's pretty much a broken treaty, right?
Yes, and we are the violators. We should not be in the Ukraine.
I want to hear where you think it's going, sir, when we come back and move into Ebola, open source, everything, and phone calls. Toll-free number to join our guest, and here's an article about it in the Guardian. The open source revolution is coming, and it will conquer the 1%, ex-CIA spy says. Our guest, Robert David Steele. Stay with us.
Now you can watch The Alex Jones Show live as it happens at Infowars.com/show.
You'll find links to all of our content there and a free 15-day trial for Prison Planet TV.
More than 60 movies and documentaries all in one place at Infowars.com/show.
Globalist social engineers are not just targeting us with propaganda. They are manipulating our genetics. We are being targeted at every level by estrogen mimickers that lower our testosterone and other hormones and natural compounds that the body needs. After consulting top doctors, nutritionists, pharmacists, and others, we have developed what I believe is the ultimate non-GMO organic super male vitality formula sourced from powerful organic herbs and then concentrated for maximum potency. Super Male Vitality was developed to activate your body's own natural processes instead of using synthetic chemicals. Super Male Vitality by InfoWars Life is so powerful that I only take half the recommended dose. For a limited time, we are offering 15% off Super Male Vitality at InfoWarsLife.com to introduce you to this powerful supplement. Visit InfoWarsLife.com today to secure your Super Male Vitality. InfoWarsLife.com. Well, we'll know soon if Scotland's voting to leave the UK, the United Kingdom. Some of the headlines up on Infowars.com. Sotloff, one of the beheaded journalist spokesman, says Obama administration bullied and hectored family, shot us down at every opportunity. And then we have the viral hashtag we're sending out, hashtag declassify, campaign to reveal the 28 censored pages of the 9/11 Commission report. Toll-free number to join us, to talk to our guest with foreign policy or geopolitical questions. Robert David Steele is our guest, bigbatusa.org or phi beta iota.net. And he is the author of Open Source Everything. We're going to talk about some of that in a moment and then go to your phone calls. But what do you and the other thinkers that you read and see, is there a consensus? Because, I mean, there's a consensus. We see now there's a decline of the whole world, really, except for maybe some areas of Asia, a accelerated moral decline, a police state acceleration, an elite that just thinks they can continue to just buy more armored vehicles, more drones, more NSA spying, more hidden microphones, more stingray systems, stealing your data, more. I mean, you're talking about how there's no real human intelligence in the CIA, except domestically. My dad just retired, but he and all the doctors where he worked got visited by Homeland Security, and they said, like 2 years ago, we want you to spy on your patients. And they said, what, like terrorists? People that said, no, just, everybody. Tell us what they're thinking. Come to monthly meetings with Homeland Security. We can even get you a little card, and, if you work enough for us, give you some money. They were like trying to turn doctors into like spy informants. And a lot of them, watch 24 or something, think it's really cool. But most of them knew that it was like going to work for Ceausescu or something. And then you learn about clergy response teams and FBI InfraGard. And I mean, I personally have to deal with well-known FBI informants, literally. And I'm thinking about doing a report on this, literally following me around and then letting me know they are. And just doing all sorts of weird stuff just because I'm on air saying I think we should not have warrantless wiretapping. I mean, it's just so crazy to watch this decline. It's scary. And I don't want to leave the U.S. with my family. There's really nowhere to go. I mean, it's almost like wringing of hands here.
Well, let me give you the good news and the bad news. The bad news is you're absolutely right. We've created a national security state, and Homeland Security and the NSA with its mass surveillance, they're out of control. The good news is it's an employment program for white guys that can't get jobs anywhere else. Okay. And what you really have, because I mean, I'm part of that community. I've been part of that community. I still care for that community. My wife still works for that community. And the bottom line is 95% of these people are good people trapped in a bad system. What this is all about is spending money, because Congress gets a 5% kickback, and nobody really cares whether Homeland Security, the NSA are effective or not. They're not. In fact, almost virtually everything that's happened in the United States has been a false flag event. It has not been a real event, and NSA has not prevented a single terrorist incident, and neither has Homeland Security. So the good news is this is really the U.S. government budget out of control, serving special interests and giving Congress a 5% kickback. It's not actually the Orwellian state. It's more of a perversion of the Orwellian state.
So it's like a bunch of country club folks and others just running around with all this high-tech power. And it's basically just a way to continue the gravy train rolling. Because, I mean, sure, the Nazis had a security state, but they were really going around grabbing people and were somewhat organized.
I got to give people credit, because, yes, they will assassinate you, and they will lock you up without due process. And there are some pretty bad things that are happening, but it's a very, very small, tiny percentage. I remember Madeleine Albright's memoir. She talked about how as Secretary of State, she was a gerbil on a wheel. So just think of these people as 10 million gerbils on wheels.
Yeah.
You've got an idea of how threatening they actually are to the Constitution.
Well, my problem is that...
Well, you are another case entirely.
Sure. They definitely don't like me. They hire, though, these really obviously sociopathic, psychopathic, borderline personality disorder, narcissist types who go around doing their dirty work. It's usually their operatives, not even agents or people. And then you'll find people with 2 or 3 degrees and a big combat resume that run 8 miles every morning and are super moral and, volunteer at the church. And they're just literally at a cubicle. And then you'll just have whoever's psychopathic just running around on the streets, doing whatever they want. I mean, I had family, obviously the CIA recruits a lot out of Texas, who just, before they died were just point blank that, they were taken out of the Army, put in black ops teams, and went around assassinating people inside the U.S. And it just, you start learning how pervasive all this is. So when you say, yeah, they lock people up, they have rendition, they kill people, it is a very small percentage. But it's still, when you're talking about 10 million people, that small percentage is a pretty big, you know, multi-brigade level hit team operation.
You're absolutely right. And in fact, we should talk about Boston Breaks and the murder of that journalist. And
yeah, let's talk about that and talk about false flags, sir.
All right. Well, from where I sit, both the school in Connecticut and the Boston bombing were false flag operations. The school in Connecticut had been closed for 4 years. There were no students, no teachers, no parent-teacher association. The paramedics were not allowed into the school. From where I sit, that was a complete false flag. It was a drill. And we've already, not we, but others have exposed the actors that were involved, the financial relations with the families that were allegedly victimized, who had their homes bought and who were then given exit paths. All of that is on the record, but you don't see the media covering that. Boston bombing, for me, the truth teller was when the rabbis and the priests rushed to comfort the wounded, and they were not allowed to get near any of the wounded. That in intelligence we call an indicator. And then you add to that the fact that there were no, I mean no, wounded people being taken to the hospitals. And finally, you add to that the big to-do about the amputee. He turns out to be a hired actor for a company that specializes at putting amputees into battlefield simulations. False flag. Boston was a practice attempt to lock down an entire city.
We actually had our reporters on the ground. We got death threatened pretty seriously over that. And that's when a lot of heat got turned on against this operation. They got really upset. And they even had Secret Service, even though Obama wasn't there, going and telling our reporters on national news. It ended up getting televised, you know, don't ask your question. And they told the reporters, don't look at this man's photos. Well, what we had was what appeared to be Kraft International, Navy SEAL sheep dipped, even wearing the Punisher hats and the uniform. And some of the guys we identified in other photos of Kraft people, we're not saying they were involved, because they were all looking around like they didn't know what was happening. They all had black backpacks, it looked like, to create a bunch of decoys. Again, I'm not saying they were even involved. And then we had all this other stuff added to it. And the brothers saying, we didn't do it. They're chased down. They're killed. Locked down the city. Try to hunt him down. He pleads not guilty. They start killing their friends. I mean, let's elaborate on why you're saying false flag, because...
well, if you go to Phi Beta Iota and you look up Boston bombing, you'll get to all of the coverage that we've had. And when I say we, I'm a curator and I keep a hands-off distance, but I've got over 80 contributing editors, and some of them are quite extraordinary. But if you look up Boston bombing at Phi Beta Iota, you'll get everything. But if you go back to the actual bomb, it was a theatrical device. You don't buy gunpowder at a fireworks store to create a bomb. It just is not done. I had my explosive ordnance people look at this. Everybody laughed at this. This was school kid stuff. There was no bomb. There were no injuries. This was a false flag. And now we're starting to see 9/11 unravel. And Richard Gage has gotten on C-SPAN. And basically, the American public is starting to wake up. And all of these little things that they could have gotten away with are now starting to collapse because of the internet, because of guys like you, because of people like me and my contributing editors. And so I think we're coming to the end of the road here. I do believe, I really want to stress this, I think 95% of the people in the U.S. government are good people trapped in a bad system. But the last 5% are doing some evil, pathologically sick things, including murdering U.S. citizens. And that's the part that I'm starting to see some signs of encouragement. For example, and this is my last comment, the court has just finally refused to accept Attorney General assurances about secret state documents. And for the first time in modern history, the court is saying to the executive, you have to show us these secret documents. We will not let you make claims without showing us the documents. I believe the tide is turning legally against government misbehavior.
Wow, I got to tell you, we've got to have you back for a full hour, sir, just on false flags and also on your book. We're going to get to your book in a moment and take some calls. But look at how suddenly the head of Kraft International, the Navy SEAL, gets killed right after the Boston bombings at a shooting range. and all of this. And again, that's a key part of the investigation.
Yep.
Is all these craft guys out there who I never said were involved. There were clearly lots of decoy groups so that no one could catch whoever really detonated the simulant, which I showed to bomb experts, and they said, look, it just poofs. There's nothing even there.
Exactly.
Kind of like the underwear bomber was obviously drugged, brought on the plane. Our witnesses saw it, confirmed a month and a half later by two lawyers,
Exactly
Mr.
right.
and Mrs. Haskell. And it's just, how do they think they'll get away with something this big and this obvious?
Look, I got to tell you, having been a spy for a long time and having worked in that environment, it is an environment characterized by being out of touch with reality. They're out of touch with real people. They're out of touch. Let me give you a simple example. Out of the 1,400 professors of Middle Eastern studies in the United States of America, CIA talks to maybe 14. And those 14 are the ones that are U.S. citizens with secret clearances. Okay, so they're beyond rose-colored glasses. These people are wearing an eye patch, and they have a pinhole on the other eye. They are literally out of touch. Nobody challenges them, and that's the problem. I testified to Senator Patrick Moynihan, God rest his soul, and I testified on secrecy and what secrecy does. Secrecy makes you stupid.
That's right. I want to go to some calls, but let's talk about, and I can't wait to read your book, open source everything, because when it's open source everything, you get the transparency, the truth will emerge very easily, and then there's such a deeper understanding. But exactly, in a national security state, it just lets lies and fraud and laziness grow. They want to make everything secret because they want to cover up all their screw-ups.
They want to make everything secret in part to avoid accountability.
Yeah. And then it's like a new title of nobility, too. It's like, oh, I have a security clearance.
Yeah, well, that's become so devalued now. I mean, unfortunately, a security clearance today does not mean that you're trustworthy. It means that you have accepted slavery.
Wow, that's a heavy statement.
Well, I tell you something. The threats that are being made to my colleagues today, they are being told that if they have a Twitter or if they have a Facebook post or if they are seen anywhere within 3 miles of a journalist, they will lose their security clearance.
They've tried to arrest members of the State Department that publicly at press conferences go talk to Fox News for 5 minutes and give their personal opinion about Kim Jong-un. I mean, it's like, we will arrest you for state secrets. I mean,
you and I are loyal dissidents. And one of the problems that our government has today is it does not understand that we are the canary in the coal mine. We are the loyal people saying, you have a problem here. And so they're killing the canary to have no warning. And that's a huge mistake.
But I agree with you, it's starting to turn around. But won't the entrenched bureaucracies and special interest and foreign interest, won't they pull off a huge false flag? Or have we exposed false flags so well now that it's into the vernacular that they are hesitant to use it?
No, they will have another false flag. In fact, the false flag I'm hearing about is a simulated Ebola attack in which they actually use biochemical weapons that dissipate, but then they pretend that it's Ebola and that it has been brought here by Saudi martyrs. Okay, so no, we have not reached the end of the false flag line. However, what we have reached is I did my first graduate thesis on predicting revolution, and there's a difference between preconditions of revolution and precipitants. And I have posted a graphic on preconditions of revolution that exist in the USA today. Now, a precipitant is like the Tunisian fruit seller. My preferred precipitant is a soccer mom that tortures herself on the steps of Capitol Hill, and it appears on YouTube. But the bottom line is the next false flag could lead to a general strike across this country.
People really are not buying it. I mean, they just get caught. I talked to the military, and I'm not exaggerating. It was 50% of the military, enlisted or officers I talked to 10 years ago that were somewhat awake. 2 years ago, it was like 75%. It's like 90% now.
I agree
No
with
false.
that 100%.
That's why.
Military, in fact, the military veterans, 22 of whom are committing suicide every single day, military veterans plus unemployed college kids plus unemployed old guys like me. In my demographic, the unemployment rate is closer to 40%. The real unemployment in the United States, according to shadowstats.com, is 22%.
Yep.
Okay. And if we all come together and you throw into that the soccer moms, I think you have the beginning of a revolution in the United States of America. And that's why I ran for president, to get an Electoral Reform Act that would put the public back in charge. And every single person running for the presidency, including Ron Paul, refused to engage because they wanted to keep their sugar bowl going.
Well, if you talk about, you know, people like Colonel Schaefer has so much courage, they tried to throw him in jail for speaking out, made up stuff. They tried to, William Binney, and number 4 at the NSA, the director of one of their major programs, they've been trying to put him in prison. And you know, they're now calling me up saying, listen, we're going to set you up and put you in prison. I haven't got to this yet on air, but I mean, it's been multiple people just point blank saying, we're going to come after you if you don't shut your mouth. And I don't think they understand. It's going to get to the point where I'm going to come after them, and I don't mean in a violent way. I mean, you know, these roads go 2 ways here. You know what I mean?
I do. Unfortunately, I think they have the power to do more damage to you than we have to do to them. But if you were to disappear, I would be very pleased if your audience rose up and demanded habeas corpus. Because if Alex Jones goes off the air, people will notice. If I disappear, nobody will notice.
Well, it's just unprecedented how just... Do you think that the power structure feels cornered now, or does it feel arrogant?
First off, there's no such thing as one power structure.
Bunch of interest.
You have the FBI as multiple FBIs. I've posted a thing on how there's actually 7 CIAs. And so what you're probably dealing with is mid-level to low-level morons that do not have the approval of their senior agency heads.
Yeah, no, that's what I've been told by the Marines, because I've dealt with State Department security forces, like just trying to like go cover a Obama event and, you know, running around. It's just, I don't know. I was like, I tell you these guys, how are you doing this? How are you doing this to us? We've done nothing. We're going to do this 6-minute segment, then 5 minutes of overdrive for callers to talk to our guest here today. London Guardian wrote a big review of his latest book. It's a bestseller, and you can find out more at Amazon or any place else with the open source everything. And I want to get you back for a full hour soon to talk about that specifically. But let's go to some phone calls here for our guest, Robert David Steele, highly recommended by Colonel Schaefer, and you can see why. Amazing interview. Frank in North Carolina, thank you for calling. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, my phone's going crazy now. I got something I need to tell you, though. About 7 years ago, I was on MySpace, and I was communicating back and forth with a female police officer, NYPD. She eventually wrote a book, and I can only remember her first name, but she told me some information, and I can't recall. It's been so many years ago, I can't remember if it was off the record or what. But she said on the morning of 9/11, she was on duty. You know, she's got the badge gun, you know, uniform, radio, all that. She said that it was very well known among the police department there that taken into custody were individuals with remote control detonators. And I said, well, how come this never made it into the media? This is many years ago when she told me this. I have not.
No, sir, that was even on Fox News, and that was in New Jersey and other areas. Let's get Steele's take on that.
Well, first off, 9/11 was we got 13 different countries warned us about 9/11 3 to 6 months in advance. And Dick Cheney used that to schedule a national counterterrorism exercise specifically to allow 9/11 to happen. Dick Cheney murdered 3,000 people in order to get his trifecta for going to war in Iraq. Larry Silverstein was briefed by the Mossad and put in the controlled demolitions. The FEMA Emergency Center was set up on the piers of New York the night before 9/11. Bottom line is that 9/11 was government complicity. It was a crime against humanity. And Richard Gage and the architects and engineers of 9/11 are finally gaining traction. And I am, with a great deal of pride, a 9/11 truther. This was all a contrived operation that murdered people, including foreigners, on United States soil with the complicity of Dick Cheney in the White House.
And now it's going to come out in the 28-page report that I've talked to congressmen who've seen it, Walter Jones and others, clearly says Saudi Arabia involved, stand down was ordered, and even Ron Paul has come out now and said there was clearly a stand down. Well, that's complicity right there.
Yes, and I'm glad to see Ron Paul get into this because I think I personally I would have voted for Ron Paul as president if he had not let the Republicans steal the last election from him. The Saudis provided the passports, and the Saudis provided the kind of the pretext for operations. I personally do not believe that airplanes hit the Twin Towers, and I personally believe that a missile took out the Pentagon. But what I like to do, and I honor the guy that rode Crossing the Rubicon, Rupert.
Michael Rupert.
Yes, he may in fact have been pressed to suicide. But the bottom line here is what I like to say is I am absolutely certain 9/11 has not been properly investigated. I completely support Richard Gage's call for an independently funded investigation. And I have lectured in New York, and I have said, if you give me the 90 days of Larry Silverstein prior to 9/11, I will give you the entire plot.
So are you saying, I know under Bluebeam and other programs, they have giant hologram projectors.
I'm not sure it was holograms as much as planes flying by, drones. There are multiple different kinds of things, including cloaking devices. I mean, we have some very advanced technology.
Well, sure. I mean, I was told about that 20 years ago, and now they've admitted they got tanks and planes that are see-through. Well, undoubtedly, some of those planes look like they were cargo planes painted up, look like passenger planes. I don't know. Just that we know the official story isn't true. We know that. We'll be right back in 1 minute. Talk to Chip and Tony and others. Just amazing interviewing our guests. PhiBetaIota.net. Stay with us. All right, let's rush through your phone calls for Robert David Steele, our guest, formerly with the CIA, highly recommended by Colonel Schaefer. Just give you an idea what Schaefer thinks. Let's talk to Chip in Arkansas. You're on the air. Go ahead with a question or comment.
Well, Mr. Steele, Alex, thank you so very much for your time and even every day you do Overdrive. Here's what we got, guys. Mr. Steele, I'm curious as to what you think about mandatory vaccinations. A couple days ago, our local city here in Fayetteville, Arkansas, is requiring our students to get a mandatory chickenpox vaccination.
Well, they lie. They say it's mandatory. It's not really. They have to give you a waiver.
Well, we're looking into all that stuff because they've not contacted us per their email or phone
Yeah, no,
call
they play dumb and say there isn't
us.
one in a conspiracy to lie to you. Mr. Steele, comments on mandatory vaccines.
Well, I'll tell you, this is why I'm such a believer in the truth. What we are learning now is that vaccinations, on the one hand, if they're honest vaccinations and they're properly screened and you know what's in them, they're good. They prevent disease. But what we're also learning is that Bill Gates and others are using them for eugenics purposes. We have found vaccinations, not me personally, but the many, many people that I rely on.
It's been on mainstream. It's been on mainstream news. They just had a bunch of deaths in a UN shot program in Syria.
Look, vaccinations are sterilizing people in Africa and Central America, and so is Monsanto grain. Okay, by the third generation of rats eating Monsanto grain,
right.
They're sterile. So what I really believe in is that we, the people, have a right to public intelligence, which for me means decision support. It doesn't mean spying. We, the people, have a right to know what's in that vaccination. And my bottom line is there's nobody in the United States of America I trust today that will tell me what's in that vaccination.
Exactly. They don't want GMO labeling. They won't let us have it in California. So you can't know what's in your food, but the NSA is going to know what you said on the phone to your wife. I mean,
yeah, but only if they want to destroy you. Alex, the good news about NSA is it only processes 1% of what it collects. The bad news is it processes everything about Alex Jones.
Oh, I know. And then add some. Let's go to Indigo in Colorado. I guess I'm the Burning Man when it comes down to the end of the day. Indigo, you're on the air.
I agree with you guys about this Ebola false flag. My dad trains constantly for these drills in the Northeast for the imminent biological attack with hazmat suits and all that. But I was curious what your guests thought about Second Amendment, false flags on the border. Like, I had this dream 7 months ago about where I was a little Latin American kid with just women and children in the compound, and there was gunfire that went off, and I ran outside, and it was basically a black ops operation. It was blamed on, I just knew it was blamed on veterans because after I got shot, it zoomed out, and it was a new...
Well, that's another question. They're constantly demonizing veterans and saying they're the main terror threat. What do you think about that, Robert?
I think they are scared to death of veterans. I mean, veterans are a sacred institution in America, and they should be. The bottom line here is that, again, you know, the U.S. government is not a monolith. 95% of it, good people trapped in a bad system. But the U.S. government is doing some very bad things at the political level. And what really troubles me is that people have forgotten their oath to the Constitution of the United States. Because we have too many people in law enforcement, as well as the military, as well as the civil service and the government, who say, I have to follow the orders of the chain of command. And what they forget is that their oath to the Constitution allows them to not only refuse to obey illegal orders, but they have a responsibility to the public to denounce the people giving those
Well, I mean,
illegal orders.
the Constitution Bill of Rights that they swear an oath to is the chain of command. It's the top.
Hi, I'm Dr. Edward Group. Today I'd like to talk about the war on women. You've experienced and heard about the benefits of super male vitality. Now, the new formula has arrived. Introducing the new Super Female Vitality. I have specifically designed this formula to help the body naturally regulate itself without the use of artificial hormones. Key ingredients chosen from the highest quality sources. Each of these ingredients works synergistically with the female body in order to maximize overall vitality. You've heard the reviews and the feedback on how the original Super Male Vitality has revitalized relationships. Now, both the man and the woman can have the revitalization in their own bodies with Super Male Vitality and Super Female Vitality. Secure your Super Female Vitality today from our limited stock at InfoWarsLife.com.